Yeah, my name's Jack Cashill, and I'm here in my summer digs in Fredonia, New York on Lake Erie. Happy to be here. Wonderful place to spend the summer, and happy to be talking to you guys.
You've written at least 13 books now over the years, haven't you?
Yeah, I think I'm beginning to lose count, which is kind of a good sign. I believe I've written a dozen books in my own name, 10 of them nonfiction, 2 novels. The first book I ever had published, in fact, was 2006 Chautauqua Rising, which is, of course, set in Chautauqua County. And that's when I first met you guys and first got involved with the whole larger Chautauqua community. I write for a series of magazines online and in print. For years I've been the executive editor of Ingram's magazine, which is a regional Midwestern business magazine, and it's kind of a titular thing. I do column or two. I don't spend a lot of time with that. I've been writing now for the American Spectator, for American Thinker, WorldNet Daily, on a regular basis, in no small part to promote my books, because that's a helpful way to do that.
Yeah,
and
do that to keep it current. Right?
Yeah, and also keeps me current. Writing columns, and then what helps, if you write columns regularly, then when you go to write a book, you've already accumulated a fair amount of information, and you're not starting from scratch. So, for instance, on my current book, Unmasking Obama, I had done much of the research in the past, and this time, it was not just putting it together, but I had a base to start with, and I could go a lot deeper than I could have if I were just starting from scratch. What the book is really about, Unmasking Obama, is really about the battle of what I call the samizdat, which is really the unconventional conservative journalists, a lot of them not even paid, who were doing the real work, the real digging, the real research into the Obama presidency, even into the Obama candidacy. And I'm going to give you an example just to start, because I've been just working on this morning. When Obama is first introduced to the nation in 2004 at the Democratic Convention, he starts off by saying, first paragraph, after he says hello, I'm the product of this wonderful multicultural relationship between a man from Kenya and a girl from Kansas, and they came together and they fell in love and they married and they had me.
While studying here, my father met my mother.
And then when he'd elaborate on this story, it would be, and then when I was 2 years old, my father had an incredible opportunity at Harvard University.
My father got a scholarship to study in a magical place.
He had to take it and leave us behind in Hawaii. Well, that story is false. Now, 2 reporters in 2008, the summer of 2008, go out to investigate Obama's Hawaii years. The first one is David Marin. He's a Pulitzer Prize winner for the Washington Post. He has all of their resources at his disposal. The second is a guy named Michael Patrick Leahy, who's from this area originally, who's working on his own dime and writing a self-published story of Barack Obama's early years. Marin gets it all wrong. Leahy gets it all right. Barack Obama never knew his father. His father and mother may have technically been married, but they never lived under the same roof. That the mom left for Seattle immediately after the birth of the child and enrolls in the University of Washington when Obama would have been like a few weeks old, a month old. Now, what's curious about this is I was just looking at the blogs from the Seattle history blogs. They're telling this story in 2008, 2009. The major media refused to report on this. Biographies were written about Obama by Pulitzer Prize winners. Biographies were written about his mother. Biographies were written about his father. And they're all skipping over the Seattle stuff because they have to preserve the illusion of this fairy tale marriage and this wonderful multicultural ideal. It's the signature appeal of Barack Obama's entire candidacy. He repeated it over and over again.
My parents shared not only an improbable love, they shared an abiding faith in the possibilities of this nation.
And it was a total lie. And it wasn't until about 2012 that the major media finally began to acknowledge that, okay, she did leave, she went to Seattle, but even to this day, you walk into an American newsroom, you ask them, where did Obama spend the first year of his life? Oh, Hawaii. I mean, we know more about George Washington's first 2 years than we know about Barack Obama's, and that's a disgrace to the journalistic profession.
And this narrative would have been maintained had it not been for the samizdat, as you call it.
Right. And the samizdat did their best to tell the truth about Barack Obama's origins. They didn't always get it right, but at least they were trying. So what the major media did is label them all as birthers. Anyone who investigated Barack Obama was a birther. Anyone who investigated his presidency was a conspiracy theorist. Conspiracy theorist today is the word we used to use for reporter a generation ago, you know? It is that bad, you know? It is that bad. And Obama's case, what made it sensitive is that he's, you know, roughly half black, and thus he assumed the identity of an African American, which made him immune to criticism from a lot of people who are afraid of cancel culture, including people at Fox News and places with advertisers. So they stay away from all of that information, and then the people who do the real work are called birthers, conspiracy theorists, whatever. Now, Donald Trump, of course, blew that all out of the water when he became a birther in 2011, but until that point, it was taboo. You couldn't even mention it.
How did Obama get to Harvard? Who sponsored that phenomenon?
Well, that's a very interesting question. The question is, how did Obama get to Harvard? And there's another story here that the samizdat broke. The major media absolutely refused to touch. An incident took place this would have been in March 2008 when Obama was running for his first term. And he was still an uncertain quantity. Yeah, there was a local show in New York called New York One, talk show, New York City on New York One. And Percy Sutton was being interviewed. He was a veteran New York Politico entrepreneur, very esteemed, well-known, African-American. And the interviewer just asked him innocently, did you know Barack Obama?
And I was introduced to him by a friend who was raising money for him. The friend's name is Dr. Khalid Al-Mansour from Texas. He is the principal advisor to one of the world's richest men. He told me about Obama. And I wrote a letter in support of him.
So Percy Sutton says, yeah, I'll do that. And he writes a letter on behalf of Barack Obama. This is in March 2008. This is a major story. Alawid bin Talal and Khalid al-Mansour are both big anti-Semites. Alawid bin Talal is a billionaire from Saudi Arabia. Rudy Giuliani refused his $10 million offer after September 11th because of his anti-Semitism, because Alawid bin Talal was saying that the Mossad was responsible for 9/11, and yet here he was working to get Barack Obama into Harvard, and the timing works out. 20 years before 2008 was 1988, the year he started, and they sat on this story. Finally, the samizdat breaks it out in August of 2008, and I was involved in that, and then the major media refuses to talk about it at all. But what they have is their own second level of leftist journalists who work for the online things like Think Progress, BuzzFeed, Politico, etc. And they go after the story. And they insist that Percy Sutton was in his 80s. He didn't know what he was talking about. They found some family spokesman who came out and said, you know, Percy Sutton is, you know, he's off his marbles. He doesn't know what he's talking about. And then the samizdat comes back, and then they talk to the family. And the real family says, we never heard of this family spokesman that the, you know, like BuzzFeed, I think, was putting forward at the time. But they managed to kill the story, basically. So nothing came of it. Had this story been reported in any kind of honest way, it would have cost Obama his candidacy. The samizdat is the term that was used in the Soviet Union during the Soviet era, because obviously The Soviet, the Politburo controlled virtually everything that you could say publicly. And what they did is they, and it evolved, of course, as technology evolved. In the beginning, it was probably just typewriters and hand-cranked mimeographs. But even books like Dr. Zhivago were published that way and funneled out of the country. The Gulag Archipelago, all of Solzhenitsyn stuff. This stuff was not being published by the Soviet press. We could be sure of that. And obviously the samizdat was a much more precarious operation than the American samizdat. We don't run the risk they do. We run the risk of being shamed, of being humiliated, being fired, sometimes being investigated, being cyber harassed, sometimes getting arrested, but we're not likely, at least now, it may change in a few months, to be thrown in a gulag for the rest of our lives for trying to tell the truth. And as they say, the joke goes, the difference between Pravda, which was the Soviet main publication, and the New York Times, is that Pravda readers knew they were being lied to. That's what it comes down to. Now the left, the major media tries to stay above the fray. They try to ignore the samizdat as best they can, and they usually do. But they have a second level of helpers that I call the firemen. I named them this after Ray Bradbury's novel, 451. In that novel, it's a dystopian novel written in 51, set sometime in the future, and a little too prescient for our own good. But in that novel, what we learn about is that firemen now are the people who destroy books. They come in to burn books. They destroy information from spreading that the state doesn't want it spread. So the firemen in that world are the ones who extinguish information, remove information from the circulating. The firemen in my book, in Unmasking Obama, is that class of journalists. Some of them are very well paid, who work for things like Media Matters for America, for Think Progress, BuzzFeed, Slate, Salon. I mean, they have a lot of money on their side. Not to mention outfits like Southern Poverty Law Center, which is the closest thing we have to the KGB, and the KGB of shame in the United States. And they can blacken your reputation, they can ruin you, get you fired. And they set out to destroy not just the story that the samizdat is producing, but the people who are producing the story. So they'll come after you personally. They'll go into your past. They'll find every skeleton in your closet. You could just be some innocent reporter out in Idaho, and the next thing you know, you're being dragged through the mud. A classic of this was what happened to Joe the Plumber. If you remember, in 2008, Obama is running for president. He stops in Ohio, and he's just doing a rope line, talking to people. And a plumber, a guy who wants to start a plumbing business, says, "Hey, I'm starting this business. How can I be sure that you're not going to raise my taxes?" And then Obama says, for the agents, he goes, "Oh, we want to spread the wealth around, right?" And so that became a news story. John McCain, who was sort of half running for president at the time, talked about Joe the Plumber. So the firemen immediately went into Joe the Plumber's background. And they found out that, he wasn't a licensed plumber. He had a tax lien some years in the past. So they just tried to destroy Joe the Plumber simply for asking a question of Barack Obama. And if you're a major player in the samizdat, someone like a James O'Keefe of Project Veritas, or a David Daleiden of Center for Medical Progress, or even people like Cheryl Atkinson, who used to work for CBS, if you threaten their narrative, if you rise to a certain level, Andrew Breitbart, you're at risk of being embarrassed, exposed, humiliated, maybe worse. The whole process of recruiting journalists has changed over time. Journalists used to be everyday guys and girls, If you watch old movies, a lot of them didn't have college educations. They had real life experience. They might have worked the police beat or the crime beat or whatever, and they worked their way through the ranks. Now it's a different strategy altogether. First of all, you start out in journalism school. This is the way you get hired today. Journalism schools, like all other liberal arts programs in major universities, skew hard to the left. So every year you have a new class of, every year you're inching that whole medium to the left. Then they usually go to work for the groups I was calling the firemen. That is these, progressive hit sites that, like Think Progress or Politico or Slate or Salon. And they get the attention of the major media, of like the New York Times or the Washington Post or CBS, by creating commotion, by getting noticed, by getting clicks. Clicks are way very important today in that whole world of Twitter and especially, and Instagram. And then they move their way up. And there is a lot of pressure on these young reporters to do whatever they have to do to get a story. And one story that was underreported is the story of Allie Watkins, who was an intern. I think she was an intern at maybe BuzzFeed, and she has an affair with the head of security for the U.S. Senate Intelligence Committee, Select Intelligence Committee, James Wolfe. And the FBI did a good job of busting it because he was feeding her stories. She was, as a 23-year-old, she breaks the story of the first FISA application and names Carter Page. And she's getting it directly from this guy. The only people who could see this information were the FBI, the conduit, James Wolfe, and the two heads of the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence. And he was leaking it to his girlfriend. Now, you would think that for having acquired information in that way, her career would be ruined. No, just the opposite. Today she's writing for the New York Times, and she's still in her 20s, right? And everything skews left, of course, because that's the only way you're going to get promoted. We've seen some major defections lately. Barry Weiss from the New York Times read a blistering letter on her way out how everything's pre-programmed now. They know what they want you to write before you even write it, before you even look at the facts. Another woman at MSNBC did the same thing. You're going to see some of that, but it's a career-killing move for these people because no one's going to hire them, and they're going to find they're trying to make a living doing real journalism in the samizdat. And when you do it at my level, you're scrapping to make a living. No one's giving you a big fat paycheck every month. You have to depend on the sales of your books, or the sales from your blog. Or there's a lot of ways to make money, and it's actually, I would encourage it because you don't have a boss and you can't get canceled. But at the same time, if you have a family, I have a wife with health insurance, so my life's been a little easier than it might have been. But I don't know if I could have done it without her. Every political poll I've ever seen, every survey of political knowledge I've ever seen, I've seen bunches of them, and every single one of them, conservatives win. Conservatives know more than liberals, because to be a conservative, you're going against the culture now. So you have to educate yourself. You have to educate yourself out of what you learned in school. I'm always intrigued when I hear someone like Hillary Clinton, when she called half of America deplorable.
The racist, sexist, homophobic, xenophobic, Islamophobic, you name it. You could put half of Trump supporters into what I call the basket of deplorables.
I said, yes, that is a rallying cry,
Half of Trump supporters into what I call the basket of deplorables.
I was a little disappointed when a day or so later she fainted, and that became the big news story. I wanted the story to stay on the deplorables because it captured perfectly what they think of mid-America.
And unfortunately, there are people like that. And he has lifted them up.
She said that at some sort of party for, some gay, liberal, radical agenda thing. And they all laughed and cheered when she said that. It wasn't like an off-the-cuff thing. This was a planned speech. It was in her text. And they were comfortable calling half of America deplorable because they've created in their own minds this image that we're all racist, sexist, xenophobes, fascists, homophobes, Islamophobes, what else? Nativists, climate change deniers. I mean, there's every year transphobes. We find a new crime that we're committing against the progressive agenda, and they make them up. I mean, who would have thought that 10 years ago people would be manning the barricades for allowing men into women's bathrooms or allowing men to run in girls' track meets, you know. But now there's people who build, whose identity, you know, is centered around things that absurd. You know, you look back, how far do you have to look back? 20 years when Bill Clinton is signing into law the Defense of Marriage Act, you know. 15 years ago when congressmen were routinely, Democrats, Schumer, 10 years ago, getting up and saying, we cannot call these people undocumented immigrants. They're illegal. They don't belong here. And they change their agenda weekly. And if you don't keep up with it, you're a hater. It's crazy. And it's amazing they get away with it. And yet I think they're getting away with it with an increasingly shrinking pool of people. But there is a group of people, and there is true to the subject, the sentiment that you can fool some of the people all of the time. And they're doing that. Yeah, self-hatred runs deep now in the academy. It has for a long time. But now we're creating one generation after another who really believe it. They're living in the most golden place in the history of the world at the most golden time in the history of the world. And all they can see are its imagined flaws. They don't even know what the flaws are. They're the flaws that they're being told are the flaws, you know? So you have people like LeBron James, you know, very good basketball player, but as a philosopher is atrocious. He's doing huge damage to the black population of America. He's the guy who was upset that, in speaking of cancel culture, his responses got the fellow, the general manager of the Houston Rockets, fired for defending the Chinese in Hong Kong, you know, from protesting red Chinese oppression. And now he can watch 2 seconds of a video clip from Kenosha and weigh in on the fact that all cops are racist and tweet it out to 40 million of his followers. This is the kind of belief system that is a little chilling. You know, because I live in Kansas City and I drove right through the protest the first night they had. I couldn't believe all the people who were there. And they're virtually all white. They're all virtually all young. And this is during the height of COVID season. And I'm thinking, where did these people come from? What did they know? You know, well, we know what they know because we have not been as vigilant as we should have been about what they teach in universities. Well, I think the Department of Justice is now looking into that very seriously. I know that in Kansas City, for instance, my office is in the equivalent of Chaz, you know, and is in a hip kind of, you know, countercultural neighborhood. It's about a half mile from the staging site for the protests in Kansas City, which devolved into riot, but our police did a very good job containing it. And I'm looking at these guys arrived, out-of-state license plates. They have backpacks. I mean, big backpacks filled with stuff, you know. These are serious-looking young men who seem to be doing this for a living. And you could go up and down the street. You see the Wisconsin, Illinois, you know, Colorado. These aren't local people. I mean, most of the people show up. The sheep show up are local. Most of them are chubby girls looking for a date. But the hardcore are there with backpacks on and, you know, pallets of bricks are showing up. I talked to one cop. He said he saw someone handing out checks, writing checks and handing them out to organizers. And this is Kansas City. We're a minor league protest town. We're not even major league. You know, I can imagine what it was like in Chicago, New York, Portland, Seattle. Yeah, it's a large, organized conspiracy. They're more organized than I thought they were. They're still not particularly well schooled in violence. Most of them are pretty timid, but they've got some real hardcore criminals among them who are willing to do whatever they have to do, like shoot and kill people. To understand what Donald Trump faced the day he took office in January 20th, 2017, you have to look at one fact, and that is what happened in Washington, D.C. on November 8th, 2016. What percent of the vote do you think that Donald Trump got in Washington? Think as low as you can, and you're still overestimating it. He got 4% of the vote, which means that 24 out of every 25 people in Washington voted against him, probably vehemently. Many of those people work for the federal government full-time. They're the permanent staff. They've infiltrated that entire establishment. A lot of them are probably innocent, relatively benign, but not all of them, not most of them even at a certain level. The Department of Justice is riddled from the top down with holdovers from the previous regimes. Most of them are Democrats, probably 24 out of 25. And even those that are Republicans, a lot of those are never Trumpers, a part of the establishment that he could not trust. So it took him a while to find his way to the kind of lineup he needed. And it looked a little chaotic, it probably was. I mean, he was a newcomer to this town. You're coming into a town where people hate you when you arrive there. Every serious department head he appointed was facing deep resistance from within his own ranks, as Trump did as well. None more insidious than from the Department of Justice, who for 3 years essentially through the Mueller committee basically ran the Department of Justice until Barr came in. So it was difficult. I'm amazed that he's done as well as he's done, to get as much done as he's done, especially with the rollback of regulation. I know he focused on Interior, he focused on EPA, and he's done a good job with some things. And then he had nerve, he had bravado. He pulls out of the Paris Accords, That was like when Reagan fired the air traffic controllers. What he's doing is telling people, hey, I'm serious about who I am and why I'm here. And he began to win over the conservative base. I mean, a lot of conservatives voted for him because he wasn't Hillary Clinton. They weren't sure where he was coming from. He was no one's idea of a poster child for the radical conservative right Christian wing of the party, that everyone fears. But he had an agenda and he's stuck to it. And he's also, I think he's made everyone rethink our position on international trade. I think we were all much too complacent with the state of affairs before Donald Trump got there. People forget that before there was the Trump derangement syndrome, there was the Bush derangement syndrome, which was almost as bad. Not quite, but almost as bad. And what made it sad was that Bush wouldn't fight back. He'd take it, and under the thought that perhaps by being gentlemanly about it and being civilized, that people would like him or respect him more. Well, they didn't. They just walked all over him. And then when Trump walks in, that ended. In fact, he won the nomination not on the day he descended the escalator at the Trump Tower, but on the next day. Because on the day he comes down, he says some pretty strong things about immigrants, illegal aliens. And the press went bananas. And what the press expected was what any Republican would do when they were being scolded like that, is to apologize. Well, Trump refused to apologize. And all of a sudden, people are saying, hey, maybe this is our guy. In fact, a week before Trump declared, I wrote an article in support of my book, Scarlet Letters, about the ever-increasing intolerance of the cult of liberalism. And the first sentence of the article was, the Republican candidate for president the Republican nominee for president will be that candidate who best understands there's no future in apologizing. I wrote that a week before I knew Trump was going to be the candidate. And he stepped up and took that role, and the rest is history. The Bill Barr Durham investigation is a little frustrating for many of us because we expect to see heads roll. The problem is right now, heads rolling does not help politically. Heads rolling now hurts politically, because what will happen is the media will immediately seek to defend the people whose heads are rolling. I don't expect to see anything after November. Win or lose, I expect to see the guillotine pulled out on Lafayette Square. I expect to see heads come off. And not literally, obviously, but metaphorically. If they win, heads may come off literally. They're out of control. I think he's being cautious. On our side, we all know the story now. On their side, they know the story well enough to know that they can't talk about Russia collusion or anything like that. Their story is beaten. It's deflated. They're done with it. They're finished. It's off the table. Right now, I think it's politically wise to not see any indictments come down. The great fear among Democratic office holders and strategists is the same fear that that plantation owners felt in the Deep South for years. There will be an uprising of the blacks amongst them. If the Democratic Party loses 20% of the black vote, the Democratic Party is no longer functional. They've got to keep it under 20%. They've got to keep it under 10%. If Donald Trump gets as much as 20% of the black vote, he wins in a landslide. Right now, and that is part of the reason right now why we're seeing this desperate attempt to repaint Trump as a horrible racist, as a racist country. Fear. When I hear LeBron James talking about every black man in the country has to be afraid of the police, be serious. I mean, you're making $1 gazillion a year. If you don't resist arrest, no one's in trouble from the police. That's the only way you get in trouble, by resisting arrest. And if you do resist arrest, someone's going to get hurt, either the perp or the cop or both. But that's all you have to do, ladies and gentlemen, of any race. Just do that. Yeah, they've got to do fear. Fear is their motivator now, like it was in 2012. And that's why George Zimmerman had to go to trial, to stoke up the base in Florida. It's a battleground state. They need to create this sense among black America that the only thing that stands between them and annihilation are your proud Democratic office holders. And it's a total lie. As more and more blacks are learning, the Democrats were the party of slavery. They were the party on the wrong side of the Civil War. They were the party of Jim Crow. They were the party that fought the civil rights legislation. They were the last party to put a KKK Grand Kleagle in the U.S. Senate, and that was just a few years ago. So I'm hoping that more people catch on. If we get 20% of the black vote, it'll be stupendous. To tell you the truth, I don't know that much about QAnon. I'm hardly an authority. But from what I know, I think who's ever behind it really is just follow the news very closely and make some useful and interesting projections. I don't think they have any particularly great source of inside information. The media, of course, now are totally bought and sold. I mean, they're useless. The major media are useless. I don't watch them or listen to them, other than sometimes to see how absurd they could be, But of course they're going to go after, Trump followers if they do anything. What's curious is that when Joe Biden comes out condemning violence on either side, right? You remember what happened when Trump came out and said that after Charlottesville? How dare he say that? And now Biden comes out, and now here's the ultimate gaslighting strategy now. And the New York Times came out today with an op-ed said, Biden's speaking out against violence. Why isn't Trump doing that? And you're scratching your head saying, who are you trying to convince that this is true? The Democrats had a 4-day convention and no one mentioned the violence in the streets, which was being done completely by people on their side, As Abraham Lincoln was right, you can fool some of the people all of the time. It's whenever I read about the generals saying this or that, I feel like I do when I hear about the Pope saying this or that, because it never comes directly from the generals, it never comes directly from the Pope. It usually comes from someone interpreting something that the generals might have said. Historically, our military has been extremely responsible. And they're right. I don't think you want to, and it might have even been a useful caution to not be too aggressive in the use of, with posse comitatus and that sort of thing. Had that said, the rank and file of the military are totally on the side of Donald Trump. They know that. I suspect most of the higher officers are, other than the ones whose careers are owed to Barack Obama, who went from being the diversity, manager to being a general, or, in today's army. It could happen. I'm not worried about that. And yet, I would rather they be more dependable and more reliable, because most of them are creatures of the Beltway, those at a high level, so you never know. My father's a cop, so I tend to defend cops, whatever they do, but I think they were totally underprepared and consequently overwhelmed. I don't think it was an act of sabotage. I just think it was an act of mismanagement. What happens is after the president's speech at the convention, serious high-level people are coming out of there and they're getting mauled by mobs. It looked like third world. It's not stuff that we're used to seeing in the United States. No one got hurt, and there was enough police presence to prevent that. But if you're Rand Paul and you've already been assaulted, one by your neighbor, if you've already been playing a softball game where a couple of your fellow ball players were shot by crazy, radicals, so like Steve Scalise, it's got to be a little traumatizing. And Rand's not that tall, and you can see him being a little claustrophobic there in that crowd. I don't blame him. They've got to do better than that. We're not ready to be a police state yet, and I'm hoping the left doesn't push us into becoming one. But they like to see police overreaction. They were hoping for police overreaction. Chicago '68 was the high watermark for so many young radicals, now old radicals. The whole world is watching. They want to see that. And some of us are sitting there watching thinking, where's Mayor Daley when we need him? Well, the pick of Kamala Harris, and by the way, the pronunciation this is true, is the same as in communist. So it's lest you, mispronounce her name, just to be appropriate, because if you mispronounce her name, you're probably a racist. Biden backed himself into a corner. He first says he's going to have a female vice president regardless. And then with the whole surge of the Black Lives Matter movement, he was backed into the corner of having a black female, or a female of color. And the pool was very narrow. I mean, when you had people like Stacey Abrams considered, Stacey Abrams, the plus-size woman who still thinks she's the governor of Georgia. I've seen her financial statements. She's been, hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt here and there for this little silly stuff. Susan Rice, whose claim to fame was lying 5 times in one morning on morning TV about Benghazi. Kamala was probably the best I could do. I asked my woke but otherwise sane young daughter what she and her friends thought about that pick the day afterwards. And she said, "We hate it." Just like that, we hate it. I said, why? They think that Kamala's a sellout, an establishment sellout. They don't like Joe Biden, they hate Kamala Harris, and they wish Bernie Sanders were their candidate. Bernie Sanders would have a chance of winning. I think he'd have a better chance than Joe Biden. Joe Biden would be happy, his people would be happy if he survives until November. What happens after any election and your party loses, there's a whole lot of people scrambling for jobs. And in 2016, they were caught unawares. They didn't have their resumes out yet. They weren't prepared for what happened. One of the offshoots of that, this is kind of semi-comic, is we had this big rally of women in Washington wearing pink hats on Inauguration Day. And you're thinking to yourself, how did they put this all together? Well, these women had booked those hotel rooms for the inauguration. They thought that Hillary Clinton was going to be the president. They were already, so they paid for the hotel rooms. They might as well be there and do something, But there is so many more opportunities for young Democrats to find homes in NGOs and in various other governmental organizations in different states, and floating around, circulating back, getting ready, not to mention the media, always welcoming them with their experience. So like George Stephanopoulos, you could come in and be an anchor on the news and make believe that you're nonpartisan. Tim Russert, and let's get, he was at least halfway objective, but he's a Democratic operative. Chris Matthews, they all were. And then all of a sudden, next thing you know, or if they're not, like Joe Scarborough, ends up being one, He gets corrupted. Maybe it was pre-corrupted. But no, they spread out. They're everywhere. We've got to be vigilant. Fortunately, one of Obama's great blessings to us was to give us 13 governorships we didn't have before, give us 13 legislative bodies we didn't have before. He cost the Democratic Party 850 seats. in various legislatures, and he cost him the presidency in 2016. So thank you, Obama, for doing your job the way as well as you did it. Julian Assange is a great question, an interesting issue. He knows what happened to Seth Rich. And for that reason, boy, his position is so precarious. I just hope he survives. Julian Assange, the WikiLeaks founder, the left thought he was one of theirs. They thought he was a captive of their ideology. And then all of a sudden he starts leaking stuff about Hillary Clinton, and they're beside themselves. They're really upset. But what he really knows is what happened to Seth Rich. And he came out, I would say, 2 weeks after the murder of Seth Rich in Washington in July of 2016. A Democratic National Committee data analyst, Seth Rich, 27 years old, murdered in the streets of Washington. No known reason, wasn't robbed. They didn't take his wallet or his cell phone or anything. Shot twice in the back, beaten up before he was shot. The major media don't even want to investigate this. Julian Assange comes out 2 weeks later and says, you know, some of our operatives, the people who feed us information run great risks. And then he mentioned that that young man in Washington was killed in the streets. And the Dutch guy, who was, who is like most in the major media, was prepared to shut this conversation down. Oh no, he was robbed. That was a robbery. That was a botched robbery. And then Assange says, no, nothing was taken. It wasn't a robbery. He was just shot and killed. And then later, Assange, this is, now we're getting into the weeds here, but later in that year, 2016, he talked to a woman named Ellen Ratner, who's a sort of a liberal journalist of sort of B-level stature. And her brother, though, had been Assange's attorney, Michael Ratner. That's probably too much. In any case, Assange told her that Seth and Aaron Rich were feeding him information. Seth and Aaron is Seth's brother. And she mentions that casually on some talk show the day after the election. No one pays any attention. She doesn't mention Seth and Aaron by name, but it's implied. Then she tells another analyst about Seth and Aaron Rich. He goes public with it, and next thing you know, he's being sued. Everyone's going after him. You're not allowed to talk about Seth Rich. And until you can talk about Seth Rich, Julian Assange's future is precarious. Yeah, this is Unmasking Obama. It's my most recent book. It came out in just in the latter part of August. It's doing well so far. Today, it's not like it was, say, even 20 years ago, where you could expect to be covered by general media if you have a book come out. Now everything is ghettoized, compartmentalized, and so you have to sell it through conservative channels, basically. And what makes that a little bit complicated is if you are too edgy, the major conservative outfits are wary of it, And this book is a little bit on the edgy side, and so they're a little frightened of it. And so we've got to play these bizarre games, And I chose to talk about certain things that they would rather I didn't talk about, like race, like Obama's sexual orientation, like Seth Rich, the man who was killed in Washington in July 2016. Partly because when on Fox News' case, they were sued for trying to investigate that. So you understand why they'd be a little wary of talking about it. So selling books today is a little tricky. Thank God. I mean, I hate to say it, we're so dependent on Amazon. If Amazon decides they're going to start selectively not selling books, boy, we're going to have to do something in a hurry to remedy that. Because Amazon's now what counts, especially during the COVID season where bookstores really aren't, they really haven't gotten back to anything like regular business.
I find this book especially important because it sort of gives us a renewed sense, reminds us of what Trump's up against. And that's certainly part of your motivation, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. I think even though I'm writing about the past in a sense, I'm really writing about an aggravated case of what's going on in the present, is that Obama launched basically Black Lives Matter, He launched that monster that's now rampaging through our cities. Trump has to face that. But the real problem, we could solve all of America's problems today if, just in the New York Times, the new editor came in and said, from now on, we're just going to report the truth. Because New York Times sets the agenda for the rest of the media. If someone came in and did that, we'd have a new country. We would really have a new and better country. It is, I hate to say it, it would be that simple. Now, of course, you'd have to fire all the staff and hire new staff, but if you could find objective journalists to fill that newsroom, we'd have a new country. There was a pattern here. Throughout his presidency, Obama insisted he learned about various scandals, from Fast and Furious to IRS abuse to the Tea Party, only through the media. No serious person, however, could believe for a moment Ben Rhodes' claim that as late as October 2016, Obama, quote, had no idea the FBI was investigating the Trump campaign's contacts with Russia. It needs to be repeated that Comey told the OIG about his August briefing of Obama regarding 4 targeted individuals associated with the Trump campaign. Obama's grounding in Marxist theory is well enough known, as is weakness for redistributionist policies. Overlooked, however, even by his critics, was the relentless invasiveness and quiet brutality of his regime. Like England's Henry II, who reportedly said of Thomas Becket, "Will no one rid me of this turbulent priest?" Obama seems to have led the way by suggestion. His henchmen and women did the dirty work. They sent Basili Nakula to prison for making a video. They watched in silence as Lieutenant Colonel Terry Lakin was dispatched in shackles to Leavenworth. They had James O'Keefe and David Daleiden arrested for undercover reporting. They cyber-harassed reporter Cheryl Atkinson. They used search warrants on reporter James Rosen and several Associated Press reporters. They punished whistleblowers. They helped frame George Zimmerman and Officer Darren Wilson. They used the IRS to crush the Tea Party. They turned a blind eye to new Black Panther goons. They conspired to clear Hillary Clinton of criminal charges. They discouraged all serious investigation into the death of Seth Rich. And even before the election, they breached Obama's passport file and probably doctored it. You know, the next project I have on the table, and I'm still contemplating whether I want to go forward with it based on the sales of this book, is a history of what I call the great urban diaspora. That is the emptying of the cities of the Northeast in the 60s and 70s by the great ethnic diaspora, a story that's never been told. I could tell it from first person because my family was part of it. And I grew up in Newark, New Jersey. And we could no longer live where we grew up. And in that telling of the story, from the major media's perspective, the people who left were white flight, right? The people who stayed behind were Archie Bunker. So you were damned if you do and damned if you didn't. And no one would speak honestly about what happened to these neighborhoods, where you had happy, communal, racially integrated neighborhoods that were thriving and prosperous and safe 1 year, and 5 years, 10 years later, they were hellholes. And this happened all across the Northeast and Midwest. And we weren't allowed to talk about it. No one's written about it. And I could write about it from the first person, and I think that's what I'm planning to do. You know, we're not ready to be a police state yet, and I'm hoping the left doesn't push us into becoming one, but they like to see police overreaction. They were hoping for police overreaction. Chicago '68 was the high watermark for so many young radicals, now old radicals. The whole world is watching. They want to see that. And some of us are sitting there watching thinking, where's Mayor Daley when we need him, you know?